everybody. We will soon begin. So, dear colleagues, I'm glad to welcome you to today's course dedicated to the gender approach. Why have you decided to dedicate this webinar to this theme? Today, we have increasing numbers about violence against the children that show that boys and girls are affected, be that in the family and institutions, among the couples or on the street. We also see that girls and boys are not confronted in the same manner with the same type of violence. So, based on the World Health Organization, girls are specifically exposed to sexual violence. For example, the presence of sexual abuse is 18% against girls, 8% against boys. The the authors of this violence are mostly men. Girls run more risks of being victims of this violence by their partners. They're risking also forced marriages, child marriages, the child labor, genital mutilation, or human trafficking. Boys are more victims of homicide. Homicide is one of the five main causes of homicide, of violence in boys. The boys are more victims of gang bangs and violence. So where do these come from? Are there norms in the society that predetermine this violence? How can we make these norms and behaviors evolve so as to prevent violence against children? It is in order to reflect together with these questions that we have invited Irene Gallego. Irene has a degree in psychology from the University of Madrid. She's a specialist in medical psychology. She's an expert in family mediation, a specialist in couple relationships, and she also coordinates, and she's a psychologist for the Project Conviviento of the Foundation Amigo, with experts with knowledge to re-educate the children in conflict with the law. So thank you, Irene, for accepting to share your knowledge and experience with us about this question. Let me remind you that we're going to have a moment dedicated to questions and answers after the presentation. Irene, you have the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Diana. We're going to speak of the gender approach as we work with young and adolescents, and I'm going to divide this hour of theory into 5 blocks. Each block will during each block we'll watch a video and then a reflection, and then at 4 o'clock we'll take a break so you can take in all this knowledge to then start a moment of questions, any doubts that may arise. You see that Camila has now shared the screen. You see the table of contents. I'm not going to spend too much time on the theory. I'm sure you know it, but in each block, I'm going to try to give some broad views of some technical parts to then have some tools that we can use as of today. You're going to see how the gender approach, you can see if you look at Twitter, you turn on the TV, it always generates controversies. And we have to see why, how we can, how this is happening when we are actually searching for equality. We're going to look at the table of contents, and then we'll begin with the norms, the main laws that provide these precedents, this background. Let's see how in 1975, we can go to the fourth slide. In 1975, we established the International Year for the Woman, and 4 years later, in 79, we see how the Declaration of Elimination of Violence Against Women is established, and And then we have to see whether the countries are advancing in this equality that was established in the four world conferences. Mexico was the first world conference in 75, and the first bases are laid, and these will be reviewed every 5 years. We usually say about this Nairobi World Conference that international feminism emerges because it is said that we have to fight, although the word fight has a belligerent sense. It's about generating an activism, as Marcela Lagarde makes this distinction between fight and activism to reach equality and to ensure that all forms of discrimination against a woman disappear. Then we have in 95 the Declaration of Beijing that is considered as a legacy of success. The Beijing Declaration is broad and focused on the girl to emphasize the greatest vulnerability of the girl that sometimes is forgotten, and it is reviewed every 5 years to see if the countries are actually moving forward with these ideas adopted in Beijing. Then we have the Sustainable Development Objectives. The fifth one mentions gender equality and works for equality, non-discrimination, and empowerment of girls and women. We also have Inspire, that I'm sure you know, that also provides guidelines to reach gender equality and moral equality. The following slide shows a series of data. I'm going to run by these quickly because Diana has mentioned this. 150 million girls and 73 million boys victims of sexual violence. 3 million women are subjected to female genital mutilation every year, and they live with all the consequences that this presupposes. Homicide, it is mostly against adolescents, and boys have a greater rate of homicide as they have a greater rate of aggression. It seems that in the non-private context, men murder more men than women. In the domestic environment, the woman is the main victim. 35% of women in the entire world have suffered physical sexual violence, and 15 million adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 were forced. As we see this information, this is just a little sample. So you can see that violence against boys and girls exists, especially violence against women. That is still a plague at the world level, worldwide. In the following slide, we give some indications, some ideas of what these tools indicate. The documents that emerged of from these world declarations, etc. They suggest that it is, of course, easily said but difficult to apply when we speak of the gender approach, because the gender perspective presupposes that each of us has deconstructed the patriarchal society in which we were raised, very small communities. It is something worldwide. It is universal and structural. That too was stated in the Beijing Declaration. So we have to integrating this gender perspective presupposes a personal work to remove all the false beliefs that we were raised with. Uh, Uproot all the differences. These are things that we're born with. There are cultural issues, but these are that the man is stronger, more ambitious, less sensitive, or the woman is more sensitive. These are stereotypes that are not based on anything that is objective, but based on culture. Centuries ago, we took the objective difference between men and women. Men have a secondary sexual, and we used this, and the women have children. We have We took this purely biological difference to uproot the cultural differences. Since the women have children, they're more sensitive, more emotional. And since men are stronger, they're more violent, more ambitious, and with more aims to power. We have to uproot these types of stereotypes that are based on nothing that is objective. We have to encourage girls and also boys to activities and trainings and formations that are adequate to their sex, their gender. When a girl comes to tell me I'm going to study mechanics, I'm still surprised. We have to take that surprise and recognize that gap we have and encourage her if that is what she truly wants to do. Boys, same thing. If they want to study any type of flowers or botanical issues. It's important to recognize the differences and have a more personalized intervention. We saw that the awareness raising, that's why we're talking about perspective. It is a primary importance. We have to include formation, foster sexual education among adolescents and young people, especially young generations that have a very simple access to pornography and the traditional pornography is violent against women and very unpleasant. So we have to promote that sexual education to and promote a healthier sexuality, the visibility of women. It's a major challenge. They were invisible for many centuries. Last year, for instance, there were some news of a spatial company saying two women were wandering alone in space. To underline the fact that they were wandering alone means that women, even if we are 10, if there's no boy present, we are alone. That's the what's beneath that title one, that women are allowed to do that type of work, and secondly that it's not necessary to integrate a man and speak with an inclusive language. So to give more visibility to women, a woman has to be extraordinary to be known. Right now, everybody knows Marie Curie. There's also several movies that is a way of visibility, but she is a unique person in the world because she was awarded two Nobel Prizes in different categories. The women who have the women who have done something important are extraordinary. So we have this challenge to continue giving visibility to all the current women and those who were deleted from history, and use inclusive language. As the Anglos said have no issues because the language is neutral, but the Spanish speakers tend to speak in masculine, in the masculine gender. As we'll see in the following slides, this generates that in our imagination, we imagine boys. This says that the girls and women are the main victims of multiple violences and boys are the main attackers, and these are due to relations of power. It is true that we value the fact that the man is more aggressive with other theories, but they're not proven. Another point in this invisibility for women is that the female criminality has not been studied. These information can be estimated. People in the United Nations, for example, against drugs and crimes, the most of them are men. The percentage increases in case of sexual violence. But it's true that theory addressed the gender socialization, and there's a lack of access to the power of women. If you have less access to power, and not only financial power, but social power as well, it'll be more complicated to gain access to weapons, for example. We also value as something that is likely, although the drug consumption has increased among women, the consumption of alcohol and drugs increases delinquency or crime. And since the men are those who usually consume more, that is also a factor. But these are all theories. This is what I was talking about, the language, the use of the masculine gender. We asked several people to name people who are representative in science, literature, painting, and only 10% of the names were women. And this was a concrete knowledge about a person, because when we looked at the people that were repeated, the percentage increased to 16%, which means that it is due to personal knowledge, but only 10% of the responses mentioned feminine names. Mm, Another issue is, as we see in the following slide, in a study where high school students were asked to draw some professions. When you say masculine, only 8% of girls were drawn. When the concept is identical and you say adolescents, the percentage increases to almost 20%. If the concept has been feminized, for example, nurse, psychologists, we are more in a percentage. Only 30% drew girls. If you give a neutral gender, that is students, that percentage increased to 40%. The language marks and some sort of rationale, and the percentage increases, although when we say the boys and the girls, that's when we mostly think of girls. So as far as language, this is it. We're going to the key concepts and their application. We can see here the greatest distinction, as we see in the slides, that the main distinctions among gender between genders. This is a very general concept. It can be studied, delved into much more. The radical feminist went to the root of the problem, and in general terms, sex is based on biological differences, anatomy, everything is biological. And gender, it's true that in that's a bad translation from the English gender, but we consider the characteristics that distinguish men from boys from a cultural standpoint. That is, cultural differences, education, identity, thoughts, everything that is generated from a cultural level. So sex is biological and gender is cultural. The following key concepts that we're going to look at: the role, the gender role, that is how the person adjusts to that role that society has entrusted to us. This is the patriarchal society where man is in a position of power with as compared to woman. All societies are patriarchal except some very small communities worldwide. So we have these stereotypes and ideas that are deeply rooted based on nothing. Like a typical example in Spain is that the man drives better than the woman, or the woman cannot drive. This is a gender stereotype that is based on nothing that is objective. The chromosomic sex, it depends on the chromosomes. We have two X's. The man has one X, one Y. The sexual identity is the sex that we attribute to ourselves, and the sexual orientation is the sexual attraction for one sex or another, both or none. And then it starts at the puberty, a little later than sexual identity. And we come to the following slide, the key slide. What is the gender perspective? The gender perspective is to accept that the women suffer more discrimination. There's that is the women with disabilities or the women in certain ethnical group are even more discriminated. And if we accept this difference, we have to focus based on that and focus our interventions based on that. But especially what matters is knowledge that is flee from from denial. Uh, Gender perspective means to accept that certain stereotypes are not real and that each person has a task. I cannot judge or I cannot make laws because I'm a woman, but yes, I can perhaps not allow sexist jokes around me. I can not allow that a woman is paid less than a man at the same job. We can prevent from using gender violence if we know a couple close to us. We can include this gender perspective in our environment. We can include it in our work if we keep in mind the adolescents we work with. If we perform an activity, we should not only think about them. What's in the courtyards in school? Football doors. Who traditionally plays football? Boys. Well, perhaps we should also add a volleyball net or a basketball basket. We have to take into account all this discrimination that is suffered in every context and integrate either individual or collective actions to overcome those. We have to look at all those characteristics and those macho aspects that surround us every day. The last concept that I'm going to present, as you see in our next slide, is equality. Formal equality is basically every country is moving forward in formal equality. That is a legislative one. We also have equal opportunity. We're doing a little worse there. That is the equal access to goods by women and men. We are a little worse in true equality. That is treatment, because I will not be treated in the same, I'm not saying better or worse, I'm saying different from a man. So that true equality is what is missing. And equality is equality by equity is equality, but keeping in mind those differences. For instance, in the licenses by paternity or maternity, we take into account the woman. She is the one who carries the pregnancy, so her role begins before us. It's the same license of maternity and maternity. No equity. There are objective differences if we take those into account to be more just. Well, as we've seen the more general concepts, if you have any doubts, we can address those during the questions. We go to the following topic, that is gender socialization and discriminatory practices that still exist. Gender socialization is, as I said, one of the explanations to give a solution or response to the fact that boys are more aggressive than women. Before we start talking about gender socialization, let us show a video because I think it will make you reflect. The mind in diapers. Through an experiment, we're showing how we take a baby, we dress him pink, and then we ask some adults who do not know he is a boy to speak to this baby.
Hello, sweetheart. I can tell that you're a little girl, and I bet you're very nice to your mummy. And I think that you're going to be very beautiful as well.
Is wearing pink a beautiful thing for you? If that makes me think you're a girl.
She's a beautiful big girl. Yes. And pretty little face you've got there. Oh, oh, oh. Pretty little thing.
Después cogemos al mismo bebé. Le quitamos la prenda rosa
We take the same baby, we remove the pink clothes, and we replace it with the blue overall.
Must be a boy. You're wearing blue.
You're a little boy, I think. Huh? Oh, look at that. Look how strong you are. Whee!
Hey, you're big, aren't you? Look at you. You're like a little wrestler with your big hands and your strong little body.
Oh, you're a very strong boy. What you going to be when you grow up, eh? I think you're going to be a policeman.
What are you gonna be? Are you gonna be a little dancer?
Be a beautician or maybe even an actress because you're very, very beautiful.
I think you're going to be a big football player.
I think that probably as a temp.
Pero no solo influyen las palabras que oye el bebé.
But not only the words that the baby hears influences, and also the way of talking to them. The girls are taken softly, the boys are treated more roughly, and every day babies are called, here people call them a boy or girl.
Strong boy, aren't you?
Put you down.
El resultado,
The result, as soon as they can speak, they already know what sex they belong to.
Bueno, pues justo lo que se ve en este vídeo
What this video
es la
shows
socialización de género.
is the gender socialization. Ever since we're born,
Nos tratan diferente
they treat us differently
por ser hombres o mujeres,
because
por
we
el
are
color de piel,
either
rosado o
men
azul.
or women or dressed in pink or blue.
Este diferente trato
This
es el que
different
hace que nos vayamos
treatment is
convirtiendo
what
de
makes
forma
us
diferente. Eso
become
las individualidades
different people.
pequeñas de cada persona.
And then there's
Porque le puedo
the
parecer más
specific
a un hombre
individuality of each
por
person, but I
individualidad
can
personal que a una
resemble
mujer.
more a man by personal
Sí que es verdad que a los
individuality. But
boys
it's
donde
true
vemos en
that,
el
as
vídeo,
you saw in this
a los
video,
niños se les mantiene un
boys
poco
are
más
kept
distancia, el
up
juego es más
high. There's
brusco,
more
a las
distance.
niñas
Playing is
se
rougher.
les habla más tranquilamente,
Girls
se usan
are
más palabras,
talked to
se les
more
apena, se
softly.
les toca más,
They are touched more. They are
el tema de
spoken
las
to more.
profesiones que les dirigen están
With
muy, muy
regard of
estereotipadas,
to
la
the
bailarina,
profession, there's a lot of
y
stereotypes: a
lo
policeman,
que
a
se destaca,
dancer.
si os fijáis, cuando se habla con una
And what
niña,
when you
es su
speak to a
belleza,
girl, what
cuando
is
se habla con un
highlighted is
niño,
her beauty,
es
and
su
when you
fuerza.
speak to a boy,
Y esto
you
nos
speak of
pasa
his strength. And this
desde
happens
nacer.
to us since we're
De ahí
born.
que los estereotipos de género sean
So the
tan
gender
fuertes,
stereotypes
porque
are
nos los inculcan desde pequeños.
are
¿Cuál
integrated
sería
into us
la
since we are small.
socialización?
So
Pues
what's a good
podríamos verla desde
socialization,
lo
as we
positivo.
can see in our
Bueno,
following
pues
slide?
podemos educar a las
Well,
niñas con el
let's
rosa
stop
y a los niños con el
educating
azul.
girls in pink and
Usar
boys in blue.
esta metáfora
We're
y
using this
pasemos a una
metaphor,
educación
and let's go
igual,
to an equal
independientemente.
education
¿Cuál es la
independently
buena?
from
Que
sex. What's
socializan
the good
mejor a
one?
los varones que a las
Do
mujeres,
you socialize
porque al
better with
final
men or
puede ser
women? Because
porque tienen
ultimately,
ambición
boys have power,
buena
ambition,
o no, porque las mujeres al final
or
tienen
no,
más
because women
capacidad
ultimately
emocional
have more
como mujeres.
emotional management and
Porque
more
estamos
communication. What is the good
llegando a
one?
un trato al final igualitario,
To get to an
fomentando
equal treatment,
características positivas tanto
fostering
para
positive
nosotras como para los
characteristics
demás.
in us and you.
Ahí se rompería un poco la socialización de
We
género con
could
la que
break
hemos
this gender
educado.
socialization with which
Lo que
we
siempre
were
damos
raised.
por
I always
yo la ponencia de hoy sobre todo es para los
are
jóvenes, o sea, quiero más que se abran los
this
ojos y
presentation
se
is more
conozcan
for
datos, hay
reflection.
mucha
I
bibliografía
want
disponible.
eyes to be open more than
Pregunto
knowing that there's a lot of bibliography, but
si
I
el año
always
que viene
launch
en
a question
Navidades
here.
le regalaríais a una niña
The next
un
year
balón.
for Christmas, would you give
Bueno, pues puede ser.
a ball, a
Y a
football
un
to a
niño
girl? Well,
una Barbie
maybe. And would you give a Barbie
sería
to a
mucho
boy?
más complicado.
That's more complicated unless it is a boy whom you know who asked for it, but you would not go to a relative's house with a Barbie for his son. By this, I mean that the woman has entered more into the male world. We study, we work, but man has not entered enough into the female world. They are insulted, you're effeminated, you're a threat, or you're homosexual, to say the appropriate words, because supposedly that is worse. That's why we need to break this gender socialization. When we say no, we raise kids in an equal manner at home because my son sets the table. And does your girl change electric plugs or the oil in in the car? Well, that's although we have made progress, we still treat the boys and girls differently. So I leave you with this and I let you elaborate this, and let's go on to discrimination. I'm going to go very quickly through here. There are differences in the salary. In Spain, it's a 16% of salary difference. With regard to Europe, we're like halfway down through the list. Horizontal segregation is the massive employment of women in the service sector. That is the one that is considered the worst, with the more complicated labor conditions. And vertical segregation or glass ceiling that we can see in this slide, that is that when there is an invisible ceiling that prevents women from attaining positions of responsibility, because that's where decision making happens. So there are less women who are allowed to gain access to those positions, the decision-making positions. And this has been investigated since the 80s. As you work your way up the ladder, there's more salary gap and more discrimination because in a basic job, you cannot you can in a qualified type of position it is easier because there are some incentives and there's some factors that can lead to this discrimination. You can just look at a picture. When the great powers gather, we see that the great majority continues being men. Now the last concept, vertical segregation, that's a glass ceiling. Horizontal segregation is that accumulation of women in this service sector, the salary gap, the difference in salary, the digital divide, the differences in access to internet or different representations. And then there's the double working day. Women have entered the public world, but men have not uh, been integrated in the same way in the private world. So the domestic work is still on the shoulders of the woman. Individually, I'm certain that some man is listening and he's saying, I do the same as my wife. No, we're talking at the global level. At the global level, the great majority of redundancy, reduction of firing, etc., still affect women. So this double working day is the load that is generated from working outside and working in the home, because that's stress and lack of time for yourself, etc. And we go to the next block, the basic concepts, and we're reaching, I think, the most important idea, which is to become change agents, because each of us can be an agent of change, and we have to work for this. For this, we have to flee this machismo where we were raised, myself, you, and the rest of the world. In some societies more, in some less, but ultimately we were raised in patriarchal societies, and for this we have to integrate the gender perspective. This is the more practical part, to take the data to achieve statistics, uh, analyzed by sex, by gender, men and women, girls or boys. Otherwise, we fall into the invisibility. This invisibility that we've seen comes from history. And I'm giving you examples so you can reflect. Men used to hunt and women gathered. The last studies show that that has to be taken with much attention, but independently, the gathering is assigned a level, an inferior level, as if we went in prehistoric times. But in addition to that, we accept this because men are stronger, and in principle, the Paleolithic men were very short, as I would be. So, but there's perhaps a biological difference as far as strength. But the last studies contradict this. Re- But the Rupester paintings were also painted by men. The weapons were sculpted by men. Fire was invented by a man. The wheel was invented by a man. All the drawings in the textbooks in museums are addressed to them. That's why I'm saying that when we have to name sources, including images or creating bibliographies, we have to foster, firstly, the objective. We have to go to the latest studies, and then we should say ensure that these stereotypes do not appear. A doctor, a female nurse, or a man who hunts and a woman who gathers, and to give visibility to the women. When we study science, we have to study Pierre Curie, Marie Curie, even Irene Curie, their daughter, who also was awarded a Nobel Prize. Any woman who did something worthy of being represented, and also bring in those women who were taken their license, who were deprived of their license because they were women, when we have to work with families, adolescents, or in our own environment. How can we work at this gender perspective with concrete aspects? Well, mainstreaming of or transversal gender approach. There's a study to value to assess the situation, and it takes into account the gender equality as the center of decision making. It's not only about gender equality, it's all types of equality. I'm just mentioning gender because it is the topic on hand, and we have to take into account this the systematic nature of inequality. The point, we should know that the discrimination exists. This following tool that we can rely on to to launch this gender perspective are the affirmative actions. If the gender fosters, if many people criticize the gender or insult women, especially who work for them, affirmative actions are perhaps the most criticized tool, because what is this said is that if you want equality, this is discrimination. Why? Because these are measures in favor of women, but they are taken to correct previous situations of inequality. Let's go to the following slide. The objective is to overcome that obstacle that exists, to equate opportunities and transform it little by little the hierarchy relations. The ultimate objective of all these measures, policies, and plans is to foster true equality, uprooting discrimination and stereotypes. In our following slide, we see the characteristics that are equalizing. There's to uproot discrimination. And when we reach equality, that action has to be eliminated. Why do I say that this generates? Well, let's go to the following slide. Yes, we have to establish a diagnosis. If there's a discrimination as to one point, that point has to be addressed, and these are flexible. Just as all the policies and the plans based on the changes in the situation, then the affirmative action also changes. Why was I saying that they generate discomfort? They generate discomfort because ultimately there's resistance to this loss of power. There's resistance to progress because affirmative actions were not established for the gender. They were not established for women. They were created for all the groups discriminated against. For instance, the uh, positions reserved in the competitions for disabled people, the parking spots reserved for these people. And in the United States in the 70s, they they were established to eradicate those collective discriminations. In our following slide, we see there are two types: those who guarantee a result and those who which do not. For example, girls study less science. Let's establish a course that is addressed to girls in quantum physics, and you sign up voluntarily. No one may sign up, but the gender formation and all the equality plans and strategic plans, and the people who do not take advantage or they mute the microphones, those do not guarantee the results. Others guarantee the results. They act at the arrival point. For instance, if there are less women than men at an executive level, the the gender that is less represented will be promoted. But for example, in a profession that is mostly for women, and in that case, men would be benefiting because you foster the gender that is underrepresented. So it could be for women, but also men. And to finish this block before I show the next video, so I can have a drink of water, the f- the following three slides speak of three key concepts. Co-responsibility is what we mentioned, that real division. You see the cleaning tasks, the cleaning and caring. And I'm sure there are some men here who respect equality and the same conditions, but women usually go more to school meetings. Women go more to the hospital when somebody is hospitalized. They call the nurse, the doctor, etc. They care for the employees. They know the vaccines tables, etc. This care of children, of employees, and the domestic care and co-responsibility would be a real division of tasks so that the woman is not overloaded, as we see in the left hand drawing. The following term is co-education. We see this in this slide. This is about educating in equality. Traditional studies, for example, indicate that it is more permissive, it is more accepted when a girl fails in math and boys in language, because we suppose that girls are better in languages and boys in math. Does the professor do this on purpose? No, this comes from our upbringing. The co-education is to break all of that and educate in equality, as I was saying, and that the schoolyards should promote the use of the entire courtyard for boys and girls, because as I said, the football court will occupy half of the yard and the girls are in a corner. These are the differences, and we should be fostering an equal education with the inclusion of women into textbooks, treating truly treating boys and girls as equals. And lastly, reconciliation, that goes more to formal equality, because that's already in as to businesses and companies. Businesses should favor family conciliation and in the family and at work, and that is through plans that are always related to plans for equality. The co-responsibility is based on our personal context, public context, and at work, and the co-education is at school. Having said this, and to see how we are affected from gender socialization, I will give you some tips, but we'll watch the second video to see if this one works.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to just give you some actions to do. And just do the first thing that comes to mind. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aw. My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. I mean, yeah, insulted girls, but not my sister.
Is like a girl a good thing?
Actually, I don't know what it really, if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like you're trying to humiliate someone.
La traduction en français?
So when they're in that vulnerable time between 10 and 12, how do you think it affects them when somebody uses like a girl as an insult?
I think it definitely drops their self-confidence and really puts them down because during that time, they're already trying to figure themselves out. And when somebody says you hit like a girl, it's like, well, what does that mean? Because they think they're a strong person. It's kind of like telling them that they're weak and they're not as good as them.
And what advice do you have to young girls who are told they run like a girl, kick like a girl, hit like a girl, swing like a girl?
Keep doing it because it's working. If somebody else says that running like a girl or kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing, that's their problem. Because if you're still scoring and you're still getting to the ball on time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. Doesn't matter what they say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl and I swim like a girl and I walk like a girl and I wake up in the morning like a girl because I am a girl. And that is not something that I should be ashamed of. So I'm gonna do it anyway. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Yeah.
Why can't run like a girl also mean win the race?
We saw that small girls, the adolescents, well, young girls, 18, 20 years old, already suppose that like a girl is something bad. Adult men, the same. It's more surprising how the small boy also supposes that, but only the small girls, when they tell her run like a girl, they do it like themselves, which means that we are safe for a few years of our life. And when we become young adults, we realize that like a girl is bad, but you have to reflect on that socialization of the young boy who already suppose that way before girls. They already know that, well, this boy is probably wonderful, but he was raised in a macho society and the women are inferior, are worse. You can take children. If you approach a park or school, they insult each other, saying you do things like a girl. You're like a little girl. So let's reflect on that. Let's go to slide 39. We've already seen this. Okay.
¿Cuál es el principio rector para ser un agente
What's
para el
the
cambio? La
principle here
observación
to be an
constante,
agent of change? Constant observation
basándonos en este conocimiento sobre el tipo
based on this knowledge that we have reflected on universality of the gender discrimination and the universality of the fact that all women should have the same conditions and avoid the secondary position, not minimizing violence using stereotypes or guilty feelings. Well, serves you right for going alone. If you haven't asked for help, if you were not so powerful in saying things that victimizes again. We have to avoid, as professionals who work with boys and girls, we have to avoid that. And cooperation and coordination, we have to know our own limitations. If I'm a racist and I go to a multiculturality course, but if I do not want to, if I can't, and then something prevents me, if I know that limitation, I have to work with something that relates to racism. I'll call a coworker or someone to coordinate. If I'm a machista and I have these gender socialization issues, and if I can't, or if it's not the appropriate time to deconstruct myself, well, that's why there's coordination and cooperation. In the following slide, we pay attention not only to machismo, but micro machismo, which are the small things, and neo machism, the new ways that perpetuate. The same thing happens to racism. They mutate to become something more subtle that fits better in our new societies. Let's go to the following one. The factors that perpetuate, there are several. There are cultural, economic, social, psychological that perpetuate this gender inequality. From a cultural level, it's everything we've seen, stereotypes, the lack of co-education, the different gender socialization, the need that was integrated in us, that we have to comply with the social mandates, use of sexism as binding and humor, especially among boys, that emotional restriction for boys, but we are allowed to cry since we were girls. Cry like a girl is something we heard a lot, and the use of violence as a lawful method of conflict resolution. This perpetuates gender inequality. The couples fight, it is normal for screams to exist during that. Well, that is not so. Let's go to the following. Economic, ultimately differences in employment and wage that are rooted. You reduce the working hours for the care, etc. All of this generates more difficulty, more inequality, the segregation and divisions we've seen from a social perspective, feeling of loneliness, lack of support. It's a little shameful to say these things. They look at you. I don't know if this can be translated, but in Spain we say they see you as effeminated, or there's an insult also for feminist women. Ultimately, there are people with difficulties, and they think that speaking of these themes is going to generate some controversy. And if you address these themes, you'll be attacked or you'll be questioned. You're not going to doubt a person who speaks about physics, but if you talk about psychology or social issues or gender issues, you know nothing about it. So there's a sense of loneliness. And then the psychological, the learned helplessness from Seligman, especially in victims of violence. And I think that we should close with this slide. These are the pillars of gender violence, violence against women. That is a lot more than that can seem, the inequality, the gaps, double day, and all of this is ends up in machismo. It's like a vicious cycle that it's hardly broken. It is four, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to give the floor to Diana. Thank you, Irene, for this very interesting first part. I think we already have many questions. We all did a bit of reflection already on how we behave also with our children or the people we know. So I suggest to resume and to think about the questions we're going to raise after the end of the presentation. So we give the floor back to Irene.
Bueno, ya queda poquito, queda terminar.
We have just a little bit left, the last interventions to be agents of change, to tell you a little about what we do at the Amigo Foundation to integrate this gender perspective in projects in Spain, in Africa, or the Ivory Coast. This was a video. Well, these are famous responses to questions, and the difference is that these questions, the sexist questions, existed in the time ago, but now women have this empowerment to respond as, are you really asking me this question? If you had to choose between your makeup and your cell phone, and her answer is, do you think this is a major issue for women? So these uncomfortable questions continue, but it's true that now we have the capability to respond. If we continue with our slides about agents for change, we've discussed the factors that perpetuate this behavior. And now we talk about prevention. And then we'll talk about intervention. So prevention. We've seen this during our presentation. Well, firstly, it's based on education, equity education, not just in school, but that can be done in the family as well. Prevent and avoid criticizing women, equality, gender perspective, and feminism, especially when this criticism is based on lack of knowledge. Do not minimize the situation of girls or adolescents or women who speak of an issue. Uh, Avoid the, oh, it's not such a big deal. Well, now you're the same. Comment the empowerment of women, but also speak of the education of boys and men under a different model from what was established. What we saw in that video, that boy that presupposed that like a girl is worse. So foster this education not only in women but also boys. As we see in this slide about prevention, through identifying these gender stereotypes, as we said, you know, for men, it's aggressiveness, ambition. For women, it is to be sweet, caring, sensitive. Identify these and prevent them. In our following slide, the it we see avoiding competition because competition separates the groups. We doesn't have to be women against men or men against women. We have to be a group, a homogeneous group that makes efforts to promote equality, especially in a work environment. And to this end, we have to avoid the sexist behavior that can exist. And lastly, as far as prevention, through non-tolerance of violence and machismo. It could seem like a light thing, but all the images that are sent through WhatsApp that pressure women, all the jokes and comments are a type of violence and machismo. We have to identify them and not accept them. It is difficult in a group to say, especially if we are among friends, it's difficult to say, I don't agree, I don't like what you just said. But until we break that sword, it'll be very complicated to make progress. And then we spoke of intervention. Okay, one once we have to intervene, and if stereotypes are consolidated, the discriminatory behaviors are consolidated, there's a new knowledge. You see, I go, I speak a lot about knowledge, awareness raising, avoiding sexist contents in our suggestions, etc. We go to the following one. Understand that physical violence is the only one that is visual, that is seen, and we have to pay attention to the indicators of other types of violence that is not visible. Respect processes of the girl, women, but also boy, male. Recognize that it's not the appropriate time, that the pace is slower. It's true, but we have to respect the pace of the processes, because if we enter in a very abrupt manner, it'll be very complicated to minimize the risks, the risk factors, but never forget to strengthen the protection factors. We know this in the Ivory Coast. We do a lot of this in the Ivory Coast, and the cooperation and coordination with other networks. Lastly, attempt to include families in this intervention. We see this in the following slide. It is important, not the mothers, rather the families. So make efforts so with the fathers, and we professionals, when we perform an analysis, when we have to lift the phone to call the family, we subconsciously turn to the mother, or when we need to make a petition or value something, we call the mother. We have to be aware of that and also call the fathers. So encourage this reflection with activities addressed to fostering equality, including the entire network for support to identify machismo and correct it. Now we have a short
Porque os
video.
pongo este
Why
vídeo
am
para
I showing you this video? To close this section about the agents of change, it is much better to integrate the population that we work with in our gender actions instead of me going there and giving them a conference. Obviously, the formation as far as courses can exist, it's fine, but it's even better to integrate the families, the young people that we work with, so that they are part of this process, reflection, and conveyance to the rest of the people. I'm now going to present what we do at the foundation as far as gender. I'm not going to show you the videos. It was a video to present the projects. If you want to, I can show you then another video for reflection to save time and have more time for questions. I'm just going to close with what we do at the foundation. We established the Equality Commission that I belong to for 4 years, that I've been in for 4 years, and this establishment of this Equality Committee presupposes that actions are centralized. There could be many actions addressed to equality, but in a decentralized fashion. By centralizing it, there is a follow-up, there is formation, etc. To generate the plans and all the measures that need to be applied. We take these steps as we see on the slide. There's a diagnosis and evaluation of the discrimination if they exist. Based on that, the measures to correct those, and then we periodically evaluate the weaknesses and strengths. We then reprocess a diagnosis, and we reprocess the plan protocol, the guidelines. We have an equality plan against abuse, sex abuse, the conciliation plan, and all the activities we include in the project. The following slide shows the definition of the project that I work at, where in the positive resolution of conflicts in families and adolescents and young people, families that present issues of violence from parents. In the following slide, we see the way we work. It's teamwork, multidisciplinary teamwork. We're always psychologists, educators. We are members of other projects, so we work in teams and we complement each other. There's group work. In addition to working individually with the children and their parents, we work at a group level, creating groups of teenagers and families. In fact, the entry to our project is through a school for families, also attended by mothers and fathers, because group work is a pillar. And then we work transversally throughout gender formation or the skills. When you integrate this gender perspective in your life, you're going to apply it wherever you go. So during your first interview, you're going to speak about not only calling the mother, you will also think about the father, etc. So we also work at that because we have actions that are specifically addressed to these gender issues. And then I'm going to tell you about the African project.
Donde pone centro polivalente, ahí. Vale, en Costa de Marfil tenemos...
In the Ivory Coast, we have Amigo Me, that's a project addressed to boys. Go to the previous slide. And the Zagal Center is aimed at girls.
Entonces está dirigido a adolescentes entre 10 y
This is aimed at young people between 16 and 25 years of age and risk of being excluded either because they were young mothers or did not do the work or on the street for many reasons. There may be at risk of social exclusion. So, and we foster formation training, although training is the reason to enter, but it is true that we work beyond training. The framework that we see in the following slide with the objectives, it is about completing the education, including the parents. In this case, in Spain, they're done periodically. It is once a month. And we help the young woman to express her project of life. We began with courses that we could think as traditionally feminine, like cooking, but then we extended it to electricity and the systems of renewable energy. So what is done with them? The including the gender perspective is about knowing the reality of the girls that are brought to the center. What are those realities? And the fact that they have to take care of their daughters or that they do street selling and they have a few hours. We adjust to that reality to ensure that they are trained. Because if we are strict and if we say that the course is Monday through Friday, 1 to 3, most of them may not be able to attend because of their tasks. So we reduce that discrimination and the difficulties that prevent them from achieving equal opportunities in education. And so we adjust. We offer a babysitting service to take care of the children if they have kids. The methodology that we use is the same as the objectives of framework training and follow-up, post-training follow-up. Well, it's always individual. We always foster the participation of parents, as always. It's true that it is attended by more mothers than fathers, and we give continuity when training is over through we follow up with meetings, establishing activities. There are also concrete activities as to gender education. And in my last slide, I'm talking about the service support services. We have to,
Formación,
in addition to formation, there are these two blocks that we work at, that we can deem as necessary in these girls. It is about ensuring the insertion, guaranteeing an insertion in the family, in the school, education for values, we would include gender formation, support for domestic services, and support against violence. This is a development of a personal project, training in as to their rights, because sometimes we suppose that we should be recipients of violence more in some cultures than others. We are capable of responding now. That required a long time, and in some societies that is more advanced. And under many circumstances, we are a little lagging behind. So this is the Sagal Center. How do we address the gender perspective? We have to, in Spain and in Africa, we include the gender perspective through training, awareness raising, and inclusion of the family, and the work with the entire center to move forward. And if we can, we also work with the social support network, especially taking into account the concrete difficulties of girls, especially in Africa, because in Spain we see less of that. But if we do not take that into account, there will never be equal opportunity, because they have family obligations they need to meet. And we go to our last slide to thank you. If you need anything, you have my email, the web page. Thank you very much for listening to me. And now you have some time. I've gone a little beyond, so I give you the floor in case you have any questions. Thank you for this excellent content. I think the work with the girls is very important, with girls and boys from our institutions and processes for a cultural change. In addition to the gender approach, we've done some work of reflection as well that also concerns this gender analysis. And I'd like to know if you have worked at that. That is the entire movement of women and the feminist theory has been criticized. The behavior and the male culture has been criticized. What we call machismo is unfortunately found, we currently find female attitudes in the culture. Everything that concerned, that referred to this machista culture, we now find some specific female attitudes that do not respond to those values that are promoted in feminism based on the differences. So we find women who abandon, who take up some warring attitudes, violent attitudes. There are reports of violence within the family in relations by the on the part of women. So the question is, how can we ensure that that gender equality is also a reflection in the women? We're seeing a change in the patriarchal culture, but we also have to promote a reflection in the women. What is happening with this reinventing in this society about being women? And lastly, what is happening with this reflection about the conflicts among women, this silent revolution that has moved the female subjectivity to the point that in institutional practices there is a lack of sorority. So what can we do specifically to transform these aspects? Well, you've touched on several points. Well, firstly, the machismo. We are machistas as well as they are. We were both raised in a machista culture. Mm, all the people who have deconstructed also have machist attitudes because sometimes it comes from our deepest being. It's true that I spoke about the new changes, mutations of machismo to be consolidated in society. One of these was to, for example, invent this term of female. There's at the global level, there are no there's no such status. There could be a woman who wants to be above a boy, but at the global level, there's no society where women are ostentatious with their power. So this feminist, this hembrist, this extremist uh, position is still an individual attitude. And I hope that there are a few women who want to be ostentatious about their power because what is true is that violence in general is growing, is increasing, therefore also among women. How can we ensure that women reflect on themselves? Well, I think that one point in this formation is to impose uh, the value that what women have done traditionally is good. Ultimately, it seems that hunting is better than gathering, and just as public seems to be more important than private, what women have traditionally done has no value. It's better to drive a car than to prepare lentils. We have to give value to caring as well, because that also caring is important. Protecting the people who surround you is important. Taking care of your children, of your employees is important. Caring for your home where you live is important. So we have to stop thinking that what was traditionally ours is worse, that that's what we were always told. The sorority, well, we just need to promote it. Of course, with a keyword we've included in Spain, and in Spain we're beginning to use the sorority, the word sorority. It's support amongst us. We of course have to support each other. What I said at the beginning, competition among groups should not be between men and women, it's also among women. And if I am a woman with a certain academic level, I will compete with those who are not. So sorority is like fraternity. Ultimately, you have to ensure that the more people can collaborate with no violence, the better. How can we ensure this? Well, little by little, step by step, being familiar with the differences, the radical feminism, all the waves, how every wave um, just dragged all the others, the African feminism, the Latin American movement that exists that is much more powerful than the European one, for instance. And obviously, always fleeing from the use of violence. We have to stop thinking that it is masculine, it is a differential socialization. If women are more socialized to express their expressions and rage will end up using violence as well. This is just for a debate, but I hope that I could answer your question at least a bit. Angelica, thank you. I now give the floor to Bene for a question. Bene, thank you. I truly appreciated the presentation. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, perfectly. I truly appreciated your presentation, and I want to ensure that it happens with the other communities, as in RDC, with when there are situations of masculinity, atrocious masculinity, post-war. There are many situations that are related to inequality. The scenarios that were presented here through the videos retrace the context in which we work, especially for a project that we are implementing, work to support victims of violence. So there's so much inequality in schools and in communities supported by social norms and ancient practices. We have addressed this question about how to face social norms and these atrocious masculinity, specifically against the young girls and boys who develop aggressive attitudes, especially men who develop attitudes that they oppose the this respect for equality. It's true that we took this issue in in a new manner, and we're working with all the people in the entire environment of the girls. So I'd like to understand how the other communities, the other players attack or work with this masculinity. This is about how we can work and how we can reflect on approaches to work on this in the case of prevention, and especially attacking the social norms and the cultural practices, especially what favors inequality and gender-based violence. We have made progress at other levels, but we'd like to understand what others do to try to see how we can learn from their practice, especially in our context. Thank you. Well, it's true that it is very difficult. We have made progress, as you've said, but how to make it concrete? I think that the best way is based on the examples, the modeling. Any educator can know that if we are a real example, your message is accepted more, is more influential. If I'm talking about this and I'm on the Equality Commission and a girl enters and I express a machista comment, or if a boy comes in and I joke and I show him to show his aggressiveness, it's counterproductive. If we are psychologists, educators, or social workers, if we work based on the real conviction that racism is bad, machismo is bad, homophobia is bad, we're going to transmit that. Then about concrete actions, it's true. Sometimes we forget the boys, but actions must also address them. We are used to protect ourselves. We've always been told to be protected, to not walk alone on the street. We've always been given that message since we were small. The boys do not get the complimentary message. The boys are not told, do not attack on the street, do not speak to girls you do not know, do not scream to them from a scaffold, do not abuse them with a car, or do not control them through your cell phone. They educate us to protection, but oftentimes we do not educate them in parallel to non-aggression, because adults and involuntarily, in addition, aside from the conflict situations in every society, we are accepting a symbolic level of violence. People insult themselves, they scream in the sports matches, they treat each other badly. In the politicians' conferences, and politicians treat themselves badly. It seems like we've lost this respect. So we have a symbolic level of violence that we transmit. If a boy is bullied, you tell them what you need to do is show him a fist. That is educating to violence. We have to avoid all that, educating boys and girls in parallel, and also foster activities for them to cooperate because we have boys on one side and girls on the other. Boys play football and girls do skip rope. We have to generate activities to allow the whole group to participate so that they feel integrated. For example, when I worked at another process for legal matters every year, I organized a football match with an official field, etc. And only boys went. I started to work, and I included girls, and girls told me we cannot play. We don't, and I would tell them, let's just go have fun. We're not going to win. It was the first mixed team, and this was 8 9 years ago. Now there are two mixed teams, ours and another one. The other ones are still all boys, but we've managed to have two. There are girls who play football very well, and when one of those girls would show up on the field, well, we had the winner of we had one of in a team that played very well. She was better than them. You cannot imagine the violence that was unleashed against her. And what would they tell her? Go away because a girl did something better than boys. What should have been there? Well, suspend the match or chase away that team, but it wasn't done. But boys and girls have to cooperate in all activities and play together and generate a process together. I think that favors equality and education for equality. I am thankful for the explanation. And my question is the religion a factor that still contributes to gender violence? I recommend books by Juan Jose Tamayo. He's a theologian who has studied this, as well as Jesus Piñeiro. It is more attuned to Christianity, if not gender violence, because it is true that religions are a factor of protection and they address limiting violence. But it is true that institutions, not faith, but institutions, are still favoring men in power. So, as far as example, as we said, it's true that they perpetuate inequality. Violence in itself, perhaps less, because the discourse is nonviolent and this discourse is always addressed to good treatment of people. We'd have to look at the different religions. There are religions with very strict pillars that have not moved in centuries, and other religions have progressed to less equal forms. For example, Christianity at birth was completely based on equality. Then it changed, it mutated, and ultimately, in our society, it seems that religion cannot be at the margin of social changes, and inclusion of the women is a challenge. But we can say that as far as institutions and power, that favors boys. My name is Valeria. I belong to the Marists from the province of Cruz del Sur from Argentina. I wanted to ask a question that I asked in the chat with regard to this term feminist that I do not know. I'm concerned that this word may reinforce some ideas that are put feminism at the same level as machismo. So I'd like for you to clarify that point. On the other hand, I wanted to ask how this is integrated, how this integrates the idea of a gender identity, gender diversity, and the transphobia, homophobia as a, or is this taken as a different focus? Well, the term female chauvinist says that it's a preponderance of the woman above men. So I'm saying that this socially is a mistake and is a new mistake of patriarchy or matriarchy. It is established to say that there are women who want to subordinate men logically as MAG, BNC from Kinshasa. Thank you so much, Irene, for your contribution that is really fundamental for us. The gender approach invites us to deconstruct ourselves. I am, I was asking myself to what extent we're going to deconstruct ourselves because we were born in this environment, and there are even songs that haunt us speaking of gender. But how far must we deconstruct ourselves? I when there's even some examples with the soap. When the dress is too dirty, we have to know what soap we need to use, because if the soap is too acid, it will ruin the dress. So to what extent must we deconstruct ourselves? So, good morning. I don't know if you see me, but we cannot hear her. I'd like to congratulate Irene for her contribution. I think it's a challenge that we are experiencing at this time. And in the face of transforming all these processes that we have constructed since childhood, even before we were born, during the pregnancy, the mother or the couple, they're asked, what do you want, a girl or a boy? And that's where a whole process starts emerging, something that is being built. We have some challenges, and in all the processes that we develop with the people that we work with in our homes, in our groups. There's the In the case of a mother with a boy and a girl, that's a huge challenge. We have to learn new ways to understand this process, but also unlearning what we were taught. In my country, in Colombia, sometimes there's a public service, and you can hire in public service, you can hire a man with disability, and the women. Oh, in public transportation, if a man with disability gets on, the women will not move, will not get off their chair. But violence against the men has increased. So I think we have an important challenge to address these expectations, the beliefs, the capabilities, the everyday things, to understand and consider new ways of relating, of seeing, feeling, and living in this society. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's a pleasure to listen to what you are offering. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm Juste Mitoji, BNCE Togo. My concern, I think that this presentation was very interesting. My question is whether women have to enter all sectors if you need the perfect qualities. Is it possible to reach perfect equality? Because must women enter all sectors in life? It's true, there are many qualities, but do we have to reach equality? Is it possible to for everyone to go everywhere systematically, depending on the culture where we live. Will the culture allow this total reversion? Thank you, Just. He had asked whether it was mandatory for women to take positions of responsibility. Do we have to force women to accept these positions? Right, that's what it is. Because sometimes they refuse. So if they refuse, must we force them to do this? This is my question.
Buen día a todas y todos.
Good
Realmente
morning.
encontré muy interesante
I
la
found
disertación de Irene.
this
Agradezco
presentation
mucho
very
las
interesting.
luces
I'm
que nos
very
brindan.
thankful for the lights that
Bueno,
you
pues mi pregunta y mi
provide. My
inquietud
question and my
va como
concern
cómo poder lograr
are
que los
about
padres de
how we
familia se
can
incorporen a los tareas de
ensure
formación de
that
inteligencia de
parents
corresponsabilidad,
participate to
¿verdad? Que las
formation
familias,
workshops for
procesos educativos
co-responsibility as part of the educational
nuestra comunidad,
processes for girls and boys,
son
because in
las
our
madres las que
community
asumen
it's
estos
usually
roles
the mothers
y
who take
sí
up
se
this
denota
role,
muchísimo
and
ese pesar,
we
¿verdad? Porque se
see
maneja
this
la
weight
responsabilidad
because
de llevar
there's a lot of
a cargo una familia
responsibility
en el hogar y
about
ahora por la pandemia el tema
carrying a
de la educación
family in the
virtual,
home, and
¿verdad?
now
Y cómo
the
poder
virtual education
implicar también a los
process
padres
because of the
en los
pandemic. How
apoyos
can we also
estratégica para que
involve
la
the fathers
corresponsabilidad
strategically
realmente
so
se
that
lleve a cabo.
corresponsibility is actually happens? This is my question. Okay, Beatrice had shared several interesting reflections in the chat box. She she discussed the fact of not establishing two separate blocks because of war and that we need complementarity. She also said that we're also suffering from an issue with the models, the examples. The woman doesn't always have a appropriate image in society, so there were difficulties in expressing oneself. Irene, you have now the floor to respond to all these questions.
Bueno, muchas gracias por vuestras
Thank
preguntas.
you
Me
for
encanta
your
que se genere
questions.
debate porque eso
I love
por lo menos quiere decir
to have a
que
debate
algo ha
because
caído,
it
¿no?
means that something
Has tocado
actually
algo,
landed,
claro.
that
Bueno,
something touched
retomo
you.
la pregunta de Valeria, ¿vale? Porque
I'm
no sé
going to go
si
back to
has hecho
Valeria's
traducción.
question. I don't know whether it had been translated. She was asking about what this female chauvinist is. I was saying that it is a new tool because the definition is the preponderance, the dominance of woman over men that doesn't exist, if not at the individual level. But it's as if in racism we said that another ethnic group is above the white group. Another person from another ethnic group can mistreat or attack over another person, but at the global level, the white people are above. That's the reality. So, since we always said that the feminism was the contrary of machismo, and we were very insistent in explaining that feminism is a socio-political movement since the 18th century seeking equality, well, the mod machines, as Umberto Eco said, I have a male references as well. This machine is to try to perpetuate what already exists. So to generate a doubt about this new movement is a new tool because I said it doesn't exist anywhere worldwide. Valeria was also asking about how to include gender identity. I prefer sexual identity because gender needs to be abolished because it's constructed. So a man who uses makeup or a woman who wears pants does not become of the opposite sex. That's what gender says. Sexual identity and sexual orientation is also a process that the transversal level through education for values. So we've included this in the gender perspective because it's also a group that is being discriminated against. The homosexuals are discriminated because they are distant from the masculine axis, approaching the female one. So this is worked in an inclusive manner. Then we were asked, to what extent must we deconstruct ourselves? Well, the question is very much connected to perfect equality. Is it mandatory? Is it possible? All of this goes hand in hand. To what extent must we deconstruct ourselves? What is ideal is that ideally we should not be machista, we should not be racist, we should not be harmful against the people with a disability. What is ideal is perfection. Reality is different. We have to deconstruct ourselves to try to for equality to be a fact in most of the situations and most of the times. Perfect equality, as you were asking, is it possible in all sectors? Well, no, not in the short term. We have to be aware that there is a dominant group and several groups that are below. I also connect that to what Diana was saying, a person with disability. Of course, there's if you join discrimination, it is not the same to have a woman as a woman with disability, a black woman, a white woman. There are very many groups of discrimination that add up. Is it possible to achieve perfect equality? Well, between now and 3,000 years, perhaps yes, not in the short term, but it is possible for the people who work with other people to be aware of this and to promote it. It is possible for education to be on an equal level, as Beatrice was saying. It is possible for me to not allow in my personal life machismo and to not exercise machismo, racism, violence, etc. To achieve perfect equality worldwide. That is possible perhaps in 3,000 years. I'm just saying 3,000 to throw out a number. We may be extinct before. A Belgian a few years ago used to say that in 100 years in Europe, we would have achieved gender equality. It sounds very ambitious to me. We're not doing that well. With regard to the obligation, and I'm putting that together with Michelle's question, it's difficult and counterproductive. If a woman doesn't want a position of power, well, let her not have it. If a woman wants to use a veil or not, she can or not. If the woman wants to shave or not, she may do so or not. The possibility has to exist for me to make these decisions. Force someone? No. And I'm going to the European case, ethnocentric. I know this better. There were parties in Europe that were pro equality. And when they reached power, they appointed 12 male ministers. It's impossible that one woman cannot be equal to 12 men. It is not possible for a country to not have a woman with the same capabilities of 12 men. The opportunity has to be offered, and also how to ensure that fathers are integrated. Can we force them? No, but we have to give them the possibility. When we added this perspective, just as we call mothers, we call fathers, we write to them, we have increased assistance attendance by 20%. It's still not equal to the number of mothers who are engaged and participate to the group, but we have increased it. And I integrate this in other questions. This is done little by little, and that's why feminism has this metaphor of waves. You make waves because supposedly the wave will drag what comes from the previous wave. In the beginnings of the feminism, the basic issues were asked for: vote and education. When we achieved that, we went to the next step. and we got to the inclusion of women, moral changes, but all the waves drag what comes before. That's what needs to be done little by little. And this is applicable to gender and all types of inequalities. But we should not give up and say, well, since we cannot achieve this in the short term, well, we do nothing. No, because our personal life will benefit, our personal life and the people who surround us will benefit. Those small people we work with, those kids will be enriched. So how far will we go? What are we going to achieve? We don't know, but we have to insist. For example, the parents call them, inform them, tell them, be insistent. And as I said, we increased attendance by 20%. Co-education, as Beatrice said, it's a challenge. As Diana said, with the new ways of unlearning, it is what our companion said, to what extent must we deconstruct ourselves? I loved the example of the soap, but ultimately soap is soap and soap cleans. Perhaps we should go to Clorox that cleans, but it's not for humans. Anyhow, I liked the metaphor. The soap washes, and perhaps you have to just rub a little harder. But all these debates and these reflections we're having are already useful, because when we switch on our television, based on what we've debated and discussed, you will say, whoa, it's true. This announcement, this ad, look at this radio program, look at that guy, he's criticizing feminism, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's using it as an antonym, as the opposite of machismo. All of this is useful. How long will it take us? I don't know, but we cannot abandon a race because we do not see the finish line. So thank you. I cannot add anything else. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Irene.